Welcome to the Prolific Pulse podcast. This is your host, Lisa Tomizanaveld. Today, we'll be welcoming Nancy Kricorian, who was born and raised in the Armenian community of Watertown, Massachusetts, is the author of 4 novels about post-genocide Armenian diaspora experience, including ZABELLE, which was translated into 7 languages, was adapted as a play, and has been continuously in print since 1998. Her new novel, The Burning Heart of the World, about Armenians in Beirut during the Lebanese Civil War, will be published in April of 2025. Hey, Nancy, welcome to the podcast. It's so great to have you here today.
Thanks, Lisa. Really happy to be in conversation with you.
Thank you. Now, Nancy is from all the way in New York. Are you in New York City?
Yeah, I'm in Manhattan.
Manhattan, okay. That's where I did my practical. Actually in Long Island, but close enough. Anyway, but I lived in Manhattan during that time. That was before all this stuff happened. That was back when I could actually take a tour of the World Trade Center, and I am really grateful that back then I did that because, as your book is going to talk about, the World Trade Center is a focal point to start the book out with. The Burning Heart of the World, coming out in April. So by the time you see this podcast, it will be out. I have the sample copy, preview copy. Beautiful cover, Nancy.
Thank you. I love the cover. They were so, the press, Red Hen Press, was very accommodating and working together on it. And the cover digital collages by a young Armenian art and design student.
Oh, nice. Keeping right along with
Yeah.
the whole Armenian focus on this book.
Yeah.
Well, I have to tell you, I really could not put this book down and start reading it. It's actually one of these books that you can read in a day, but you're going to want to go back through it. It absolutely had me captivated. I actually closed out the world around me, and I like family, hush, I'm reading. It's just that good.
Well, thank
Um,
you.
yeah,
I mean, I
it's
will say that what I try to do as a writer this is my 4th novel about post-genocide Armenian diaspora experience. And in each of them, what I have tried to do is to create an immersive world so that when you go, you start reading, you are drawn immediately into the place and the time, that the characters are living in.
exactly. Well, I think you presented it in just the right fashion. By starting out with the whole World Trade Center experience. And Vera being the main character in the book, I mean, I was drawn through it wondering, how is this author connected to this character?
Yeah.
And I wonder if you could give us a little insight on that.
Yeah, this book took a long time. I spent over 10 years from start to finish. And I'm interested in, this is, as I said, the 4th book. Each of my previous 3 books focused on Armenian diaspora experience has as a central character a woman. The first one was ZABELLE, and it was a fictionalized account of my grandmother's life as an Armenian genocide survivor and immigrant bride. Then the second one was Ani, and she was someone of my generation, half Armenian, who had grown up in the community under the shadow of this unspoken, mass trauma. And then the third one was a character, Mara, who lived in Paris and was a young person around the same age as Vera during the Nazi occupation. And so then here I've come to Vera, and I would say, each of the characters, probably the Ani, the one who is of my generation, is the closest one to me that has more of my personal experience in it. But each of them is a sort of composite and invented character, which also there are elements of me, the way that Flaubert said, I mean, many writers said, that the characters are them, like Madame Bovary, c'est moi kind of thing. But, Vera is different. She's born 5 years later than I was born. She was born in Beirut. I was born in the Armenian community of Watertown, Massachusetts. But there are elements of me in that character. I think the part of Vera being so sensitive to the violence around her, sensitive to the suffering around her, that's definitely something that's part of my temperament. I think that she inherited that from me. But she's her own person with her own life trajectory.
I think that that was the part of when you brought up about the violence and what was going on in the community. I thought, and as sensitive as Vera was, her mother was kind of like the opposite. Her mother was, kind of like toughen up. It's kind of way why you so connected to the
I know.
store.
There's that moment when Vera's crying when they see a terrible thing happen at a
Mhm.
checkpoint, and
Mhm.
Vera, as a child, she's probably 11 years old or something, starts weeping, and her mother's yelling at her and saying, "Why are you crying? You can't cry for the whole world." And Vera doesn't argue with her mother, but she thinks to herself, "No matter what my mother says, I know you can cry for the whole world."
And I feel like this book was a cry. It's a cry for the world and what's going. I can connect to this right now, 2025, of thinking about what's going on in the world right now and the genocide that is happening. It's not like it's a thing of the past,
Right.
unfortunately.
And also, right. And I mean, I think that that's part of what my whole project has been with these 4 books, which I called the sort of Armenian diaspora quartet, is the idea of the intergenerational transmission of trauma, and how there's, the Armenian in this characters in this book, the grandmother survives the Armenian genocide, and then the family, the community and the family, they've rebuilt their lives in Beirut, and then the Civil War breaks out. And when that happens, for people who've experienced that kind of mass trauma, it reactivates the trauma from earlier times. And then in some ways, even someone like Vera or her parents who didn't live the genocide, but they inherited it in in an almost bodily way. And that's kind of what I'm interested in also, is the way trauma sort of resides in the body and lingers in the body. But then on the other side, because I'm also really interested in the ways that people are strong and that people can persist and manage and continue. Even in there's a war going on, and Vera, is growing up, coming of age, and she's having a crush on boys, and she's like, doing bad things that her mother doesn't want her to do, and she's still living her sort of teenage life, and even with what's going on, say in Gaza now, I work as a mentor through this program called We Are Not Numbers, which is a literary mentorship program that pairs established writers with young people in Gaza who are writing in English, and helping them, work on and polish essays, poems, stories, that kind of thing. So I've been doing that. So I am in daily touch with young people who are in Gaza, and there, like last night was horrific. The so-called ceasefire ended, and Israel bombed all across Gaza. And I think the current death toll from last night alone was like 400 people. And I was on Signal with some of these young people in Gaza, and they were all terrified. And there were a number of us mentors who were in a Signal chat with them, and we stayed awake with them for a couple of hours until, just on Signal chat. We can't even really talk to them on the phone. There isn't always enough, phone coverage to do that. So I guess that I feel like, my family's experience, my grandmother's experience of the genocide, my community's experience of the genocide, and then of these subsequent traumas, including, the Armenians who were in Beirut during the Civil War, or the Armenians who were in Paris during World War II, or, I think that, that at the very end of the book, there's a phrase in Armenian, and I didn't translate it. I left it in Armenian, and what it says is "for my people." And I guess that the way Vera does, I have an expansive idea of who my people are.
Well, I think you did a great job of pulling the sensitivities of all of the people, all the characters in the book. I liked how you had Vera, growing and becoming a teenager. I think it was relatable to someone like here, United States teenager reading this book
Yeah,
would be able to connect with that character, yet we're in a protective shell, so to speak, or at least we think we are.
right.
And so if I put myself, I'd have to go back a few years, but if I put myself in the shoes of a teenager, and read this book, it would sensitize me to what was going on,
Yeah.
with the Armenian
I mean, I
community.
hope you also felt that that there is some humor in the book, and there is.
Yes,
I mean, it's
yes.
lively. It's not like a dirge or something. Although
Mhm.
I did try at the very end of the book. There's a folk tale, which has a different tenor. I read probably, I don't know, 50 or 60 Armenian folk tales while I was working on that. I really wanted to get that sort of tonality. And then there's magic in it. There's so much terrible that's happening, but there is a magical element to it. I don't want to, have any spoilers for people who haven't read it yet, but I wanted there to be magic at the end.
Yeah, I have to be careful because I could probably tell too much of the story. I want people to read this book. I think this book should be read by, not as adults, but young adults would be able to get into this book. When I was a teenager, this is the kind of book I would have been drawn to. I like things that pull me into other people's lives and help me become more sensitive to what's going on in other parts of the world. And
I
and
mean, it's
that
kind of incredible to me that, well, we actually pegged the publication date to April of 2025 because that's actually the 50th anniversary of the start of the Lebanese Civil War. And it's also the 110th anniversary of the Armenian genocide. So, but it is interesting when that when you do how in other ways, it's about the past, it's about history, but it's also so timely because, Lebanon was just recently under bombardment again, and people were doing the same thing of hiding in bomb shelters and, you know,
it's good to keep our eyes open, our hearts open, our awareness up about these things. And yourself, I understand that you have a family heritage, a survivor.
yeah. I grew up
Of
in a
this.
two-family house in Watertown, Massachusetts with my Armenian grandmother who was a genocide survivor. And I attended an Armenian evangelical church where the whole congregation, when I was, young, the whole congregation was made up of Armenian genocide survivors and their children and their grandchildren. But we didn't really, it was very wild because we didn't really talk about it. It wasn't, but it was there in my first novel, ZABELLE, that was based on sort of composite character based on my grandmother says, we never spoke of those times, but they were like dead and rotting animals behind the walls of our house. So it was just, kind of an atmosphere. And I remember when I was, I think maybe 10, there was a Sunday service where one of the, I think they were called deacons, stood up in front of must have been in April, stood up in front of the, church and gave this entire story about his father, during the genocide being burned alive in front of the family. The Turkish soldiers came into their home and demanded that his father renounce his religion, and his father refused. And so they just they threw him into the fireplace and burned him alive. And like I said, I was 10 and it was just this very strange thing. It was like some, man in our church that I knew, this sort of avuncular figure was just telling this absolutely horrific story. And then there was no discussion of it ever again. It just kind of like dropped like a stone into a pond kind of thing. But it stayed in me. And it wasn't until I was in college, I was taking a women's studies class on mothers and daughters of literature. And one of the topic assignments was to do an oral history interview with a woman in your family. So I went home and sat on the back porch with my grandmother and asked her to tell me her life story, which would never have occurred to me to do that. And she told me this just crazy, to me, horrific story of being driven into the desert with her family, her parents dying on the road, her siblings starving to death, and that it was just she and her younger brother left, and they were in a tent camp in the Syrian desert outside Ras Al Ain with 8,000 Armenian orphans. So yeah, I feel like my grandmother, that story she told me, it was a terrible story, and it was a burden on the one hand, but in another way, it was a kind of legacy. And as a writer, she became my muse. So I talk about how there's something of me in each of the characters of in the four novels. There's also something of my grandmother in each of the books. There is a grandmother in each book, but each of them is different. It's not like the same person. But I took elements of my grandmother's story or my grandmother's character. Like I would say Vera's grandmother in this book with the talent. My grandmother used to tell us fairy tales and folk tales and Bible stories. My sister and I would go, my mother would be going shopping, and my sister and I would go upstairs to stay with my grandmother, and we would have lunch. And then after lunch, we would lie down, three of us on her bed, and she would tell us stories. So that I put that element. And
Yeah.
the other thing is these sort of Armenian proverbs and funny sayings that
Mhm.
Vera's grandmother has. Some of that, could have come out of my grandmother's mouth.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like the grandmother. She was kind of like, more the even person through the book,
Yeah.
and
And
offered a lot
you're
of
right. Vera's
wisdom.
mother is like really tough. She's like no nonsense, whatever, and but it was funny because I did a lot of interviews for this book. I read at least 50, 60 books about the Lebanese Civil War, and I interviewed probably, I don't know, at least 40 people. And um, a couple of the people that I talked to who were my age or a little younger, maybe Vera's age or a little younger, told me stories about, well, oh, it was really fun during the war because they would cancel school and then we could go to the bomb shelter. And when we were in the bomb shelter, all our friends were there and we could play. And, so it was like really a good time. And then they each said to me, of course, I didn't think about what it was like from my mother's perspective. My mother, who was in that bomb shelter, who was like responsible for keeping us safe. So
Yeah,
that was the thing. The mother felt the tremendous burden and
for
the,
sure.
the fear of, and there are incidents in the book, as somebody gets shot by a sniper, um, people's homes are bombed and so on. And so you could see the mother was just holding it together so tightly. And when you're a teenager, I mean, there was one of, as a writer, sometimes you have favorite lines. One of my favorite lines was like, Vera's doing this, like, things she shouldn't be doing, very risky. And then one of her friends says to her, um, just because your mother doesn't like it doesn't mean it's wrong. She's not always wrong, or something like that.
Yeah. 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 So, I know I'm going to give away something in the book. I just know it's I better be careful. But I I just can't emphasize enough how important I think this book is. It's given me another exposure to something that I wasn't really completely aware of. I try to keep up with things in the world as much as I can until it gets to be too much, then I have to take a break.
Yeah.
I can imagine in creating this, that's why it took as long as it did. Not only the research you had to do, but the emotional connection with the book.
Yeah.
Um,
Although it's a very funny experience as a writer, because, in each of my books there are some very difficult moments. I mean, I try to imbue it with humor and, poetry. And I mean, this book is just full of birds. There are birds from page one, sort of like woven, through the whole thing. I love birds and they're all in there. Um, and I forgot what I was going to say about that. Oh, but in the very, very sad parts or the very, very tough parts, when I'm working on it as a writer, I'm so focused on crafting the sentences and create and recreating the atmosphere and creating the episode, so to speak, that I don't really feel it. And I've had the experience several times when the book comes out and I have actually done one reading from this book where when you read it out loud to an audience, I've made myself cry, which is really like now I know that's going to happen. The first time it happened to me, it was in my first book, the first reading, and I read something from the book and it made me cry and I was really shocked. Because when you're writing it, I didn't feel it like that.
yeah. As a writer myself, I don't cry easily. I'm the type of person that has kind of a strong, I just don't know if it's strong, but I have this, it's hard for me to cry. And if I am working on a character or a scene and it brings tears to my eyes, and I know I hit the sweet spot because I made myself emotional. So,
I
that's kind
like
of an
it when I make
indicator.
myself laugh. That's the one.
Yeah. Oh, that too. That too. If I start laughing, I have a friend that writes a lot of humor, and if I start just belly laughing on something they wrote, she said, "I know it must be good. What did you just read? I want to hear what you
Yeah,
just read."
yeah.
Yeah, it's just two emotions. Um, yeah, definitely. But so tell me what you're doing with your book tour. Are you going to be doing readings around and about?
Yeah, I mean, it's not that extensive. I'm basically doing New York, Boston, and LA. Traveling with LA is going to be crazy because I'm going for the Associated Writing Programs conference, and there's a lot of group events, offsite events, a couple that I'm reading at associated with that. And then the week after that, I'm doing an event at Diesel Bookstore, which is an independent bookstore. I'm on a panel at Occidental College at Oxy Arts. Then I'm doing a reading at the Glendale Public Library, which Glendale is a sort of, I don't know if you call it a suburb, but it's part of LA and it's full of Armenians, like tens of thousands of
Oh,
Armenians.
wow.
So I've done readings at that public library before, and usually 100 people show up. We'll see, what happens with this one because I'm kind of saturating the area. And then the next night, Red Hen Press in Pasadena is hosting a party that's a literary salon where I'll be reading with two other Armenian poets. So that's LA. Do two events in Boston, two events in New York, and then our local Armenian organizations and groups have started contacting me to do things. So I'll do an event for the art community in Detroit. They're gonna fly me up to Toronto. I'm gonna do another one in Boston again in the fall, and I'm gonna do something at a local public library upstate where we have a house and that kind of thing. So that's it's not, it's enough.
So it sounds like a lot to me.
The LA part I'm a little worried about because it's like I'm there for 10 days and I have one free evening.
Wow. Well, I hope everything goes well and smooth, and I will be watching for the main release of your book. I'll be releasing the podcast at the same time on April 1st. And I'm real excited for you, and I will definitely be spreading the word
Well, thank you so
about
much. Thank
this.
you for reading the book. Thank you for taking the time to talk to me. Thank you for your enthusiasm. It's really wonderful to touch people. I mean, it's called the burning heart of the world, and my idea is to touch people's hearts.
You did it.
Thank you.
You definitely did. Well, thank you so much, Nancy. It's been great having you on here today. Best wishes to you.